Hey folks, welcome to the Ramble. So here's the thing, I have two things that I would love to talk to you about, and originally I kind of wanted to make individual videos about each of these things, but with your permission, I'm just going to talk about them both right here on the Off Monday Ramble. And these are both reviews of things. It's a movie review and a review of a TV show, so if I'm going to be doing reviews, I think instead of doing it this way, I should switch over here to this camera angle, because this is the angle that I use to do movie reviews now. And just a little quick tip for you YouTube youngins, unnecessarily cutting between two camera setups in a video is a great way to give the illusion of production value. And you can even turn back into the original shot, which makes it seem even fancier than it is, especially considering that this is the show that you created to give yourself a break from the scrupulously scripted and precisely edited videos that you are making on the other Mondays. Anyway, the two things that I'm going to review for you in this video are actually connected to each other very, very tenuously. They're tethered by this faint gossamer thread, and that thread is the fact that they were both a lot better than I thought they would be. The first thing that I'm going to review is a little movie you might have heard of. It came out about a week ago. It's gotten some media attention. It's Avengers Infinity War. And by the way, if you're watching this and you're worried I'm going to spoil something for you, no spoilers. I try to do my movie reviews without spoilers. The movie has been out over a week, so if you wanted to see it, you've probably seen it by now. But just in case you haven't had a chance to, I'm not going to spoil anything for you. It was awesome! I know a lot of people love it, and there are some people who are very underwhelmed by it, people whose opinions I really respect, and they had some very interesting things to say about it. Some people were just sort of about it, and some people were like, I do not like this movie. I thought it was great. I thought it was the best of the Avengers movies so far, and I specify Avengers movies, meaning movies with Avengers in the title. I thought it was better than the Avengers. I thought it was better than the Avengers Age of Ultron. If we count Captain America Civil War as an Avengers movie, then I guess Infinity War would be my second favorite Avengers movie, because I don't think it was as good as Captain America Civil War, but it was damn good, and it was so much better than I thought it would be going in. Going into the theater, I expected it to be fun and to be enjoyable and to be diverting and to sort of appeal to my comic book nerd sensibility. There is a certain undeniable cool factor to seeing so many characters that you enjoy and are entertained by and have some attachment to through their various other movies, seeing them all in one movie at the same time, right? That's just cool. And I knew that Marvel would not mess that up, but I was afraid that with so many characters that the film would be really weighed down by exposition, that the film would be just super complicated in terms of plot. It would be difficult to follow. Even if you had seen the other Marvel movies, I worried that it would have difficulty juggling between multiple locations and so many characters. And actually, for the most part, those concerns, at least to my mind, as I watched the film, those concerns were unfounded. The movie doesn't suffer from any of those problems to a serious degree. Obviously, there's a little bit of that. There are a lot of characters, and it is a long movie. It's a 2.5-hour movie, and there are multiple locations. There's a lot going on at once. There's a lot to keep track of. You do have to pay attention. It's not the sort of movie that you can just sort of turn your brain off and zone out. I mean, if you want to be able to follow it and you want the things that happen in the movie to land with you emotionally as they are designed to, then it's a movie you have to pay attention to. But I didn't think it was difficult to follow. It didn't wear me out. The action scenes didn't drag on and on and on, which is a major concern of mine of late with superhero movies. Even superhero movies that I really, really enjoy, they lean into the action so much that the action becomes exhausting. And I didn't really get that in Infinity War. It did not wear me out. It did not get to a point where I was like, oh God, come on, like how much longer do we have? Never felt that. And most surprisingly of all is it really packs an emotional punch. It really gets you right in the heart. It takes advantage of the fact that most of the audience, certainly the target audience for this film, have seen the other movies in this franchise, have seen the other Marvel Cinematic Universe entries. So they know who these people are. And we all have our favorites. We all have our characters that we're just in love with and we would follow in anything. And we're invested in what happens to them, and we want to see them succeed. And of course, we want to see them defeat Thanos and save the universe, but we're interested in what happens to them personally as well. And the movie knows this and does a really great job at taking advantage of that and of giving scenes just amazing emotional resonance. For a movie that is as blatantly commercial as this is. Like, this is one of the most blatantly commercial, it's almost like an act of mercenary capitalism, where, hey, let's take everybody's favorite superheroes and we'll put them all in one movie and then we'll have all the money. That's why this movie exists, fundamentally. But it takes a project like that. The Russo brothers, who are the directors of the film, they take a project like that and they imbue it with such heart and such emotion, and they wring such a powerful, visceral, emotional reaction out of me when I watch the movie that I really have to commend them for taking something that is, at the bottom, a commercial exercise. It's separating the marks from their money. It's getting you to buy tickets. That's what the movie exists primarily for. That's its essential purpose. And yet, it also works on an artistic level. And in many ways, and in certain scenes, it's even kind of beautiful, and I would never have expected being able to say that about the third Avengers movie, specifically the long built-up mega crossover. I never would have thought that I would come out of the theater going, that was actually kind of beautiful. And yet, that's what I felt when I walked out of the theater. I appreciate the fact that the movie, one of the things that allows it to escape the trap of just being bogged down by exposition is that the movie assumes that you know who everybody is. And except for a few lines of dialogue to set up certain relationships that are super important, or to set up certain characters that are super important, that you need to know who they are for the plot to make sense, there's almost no exposition. And for people who are going in fresh, if this is your first Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, that's probably a mistake. You should probably, this is one of those cases where, unfortunately, it's not a good entry point into the franchise. So if you come into the theater and you haven't seen the Iron Man films or the Thor films or the Guardians of the Galaxy films, if you're coming in and this is your first MCU movie, I understand why people would not enjoy this, or why they would think it kind of lands with a thud, or it's underwhelming. I completely understand that reaction. It assumes a level of familiarity with the characters, with the story, with the world, and then it's off and running almost immediately. That's another thing that really, really helps, is that it has such a great pace to it, where it just starts and it goes and it knows when to slow down and then it knows when to speed up again, and it's really, really just well executed in terms of direction, in terms of editing, in terms of screenwriting. It's a tremendous juggling act, but it never really lets you see how technical it all must have been to get everything to sing and harmonize as well as it does. So it's very, very, very impressive. In terms of characters, the revelation in the film is the villain, is Thanos. This is, many people have said, this is a Thanos movie, and Thanos is actually not pictured in that image on my desktop back there. But Thanos is the star of the film in many ways, even though he is the villain, and even though he is evil and he is monstrous. He is also functionally probably the closest thing to a single protagonist the movie has, because his actions are what drive the plot. And yes, he is absolutely the bad guy. And I come out of the film not sympathizing with him, not thinking that he has a point, not thinking Thanos was right, but at the same time, recognizing that he has been humanized to such an extent that he's not just a cardboard cutout, one-dimensional bad guy with, universe-destroying plans. He has depth, he has humanity, he has dimension. And he reminded me a lot of more like a villain from one of the Marvel Netflix shows than the villains from the films have been. And specifically, Wilson Fisk from season 1 of Daredevil on Netflix is maybe the most memorable character on that show. And I saw shades of Fisk in Thanos, in this version of Thanos, where, yeah, I don't sympathize with him. I don't think that he's right. I don't think that his actions are in any way permissible or excusable or understandable or whatever. He's an evil person and he wants to do an evil thing. And we see him do unspeakably evil things in this movie. And yet, as he does them, we learn enough about him. We see enough of his motivations, and we see conflict within him that it makes him into a more fully realized character. He's not just a big bad guy that the other heroic characters have to stop from accomplishing something evil. He has dimension. He has character. He has depth. He's a great villain. I didn't expect Thanos to be a great villain in this movie, and he turns out to be a great and fascinating and horrifying villain. Very, very impressed by that. So overall, big thumbs up for me for Avengers Infinity War, and I can't wait for the continuation next year. And if by chance you haven't seen it, I would recommend going to see it. I don't recommend it as a first Marvel movie, but if you have been into the Marvel movies as I have been, I fully recommend it. I think I was utterly delighted and surprised by how good it was, and by how moving it was, and by how artful and beautiful in many senses it was. So that's review number one. Review number two is of this other thing that I was looking forward to, Cobra Kai, which is not really a TV show. It's a YouTube Red original series, and it is a continuation of The Karate Kid, one of my favorite 80s film franchises. This is another thing, like Infinity War. I went into it thinking, okay, this is going to be enjoyable. This is going to be fun. This is going to be something that will sort of push my nostalgia buttons, and I'll like it, but it'll be goofy and cheesy and frivolous, and ultimately it'll just be like, oh, I'm glad I watched that, but no big deal. How wrong I was. Not only did Cobra Kai push my nostalgia buttons, not only did it give me superficially what I was hoping for from a decades after the fact sequel to The Karate Kid, it's a damn good show. For real. It's so much better than I thought it was. In fact, it exceeded my expectations even more than Avengers Infinity War did, because I expected this to be just a complete trifle. And man, is it good. And the main reason that it's so good is that guy in the foreground on the screen there, William Zabka, as Johnny Lawrence. Johnny Lawrence, of course, if you remember from the original Karate Kid, he was the bully. He was the Cobra Kai karate champion. He was the guy who tormented Daniel LaRusso. And in Cobra Kai, Johnny takes center stage. And Daniel is in there as well. Ralph Macchio returns as Daniel, and he has a lot to do in the movie as well. He is also a leading character. But for the most part, the heart and soul of the series rests in Johnny and his story. And there is something so revelatory about William Zabka's performance in this show, where he takes Johnny, he takes this character that for the last 34 years has been haunted by losing the karate tournament to Daniel in The Karate Kid, and then splitting up from his abusive karate teacher, his sensei, Kreese, which happened at the beginning of Karate Kid Part 2, you will remember. And his life has just been sort of on this downward spiral ever since. And Zabka takes this character and makes him so funny, so funny, and so human that it's remarkable. Johnny in Cobra Kai is hilarious because he's so out of touch, because he's still stuck in the 80s, because he still acts and talks and sees the world through the eyes of a stereotypical 1980s cool high school jock. You know, he still talks about, oh, you need to learn karate so you can kick ass and score with hot babes. You know, he talks in that idiom, and he sees the world through that perspective. And the movie makes fun of him for that. The movie doesn't portray that as a good thing to be. The way Johnny is not the way that the show says, see, be like Johnny. He's viewed as kind of pathetic because of that, kind of sad. It's sad that he hasn't grown up, that he hasn't moved on. It's sad that he still views the world in that way. There are so many punchlines in the movie that rest on Johnny being that kind of a guy, being kind of an out-of-time, backwards doofus. But he's not just a punchline as Infinity War does with Thanos, Johnny is humanized. We see him struggle. We see him suffer. We see him in these agonizing moments of clarity. He has these moments throughout the show where he recognizes where his life has gone off the rails. He recognizes the role that he himself has played. He becomes aware of the things in his life that he needs to change, that he needs to do better. And it's almost always fleeting. He has moments where you think, oh, he's got it. He's going to change. He's going to turn it all around. And then something happens and it knocks him down and his anger takes over and he goes back to the old way. And it's agonizing to watch, because by the second or third episode, even though you don't agree with Johnny and everything he says and does, even though you don't necessarily think of him as a good guy, because he's been so humanized, you want him to succeed. You want him to redeem himself. You want him to turn things around. You want him to see the error of his ways. And the show sees the error of his ways. One of the really unexpectedly powerful things about the series as a whole is by the end of it, you see that Cobra Kai mentality, and a lot of people have wondered, like, well, if it's a Karate Kid, like, why did they call it Cobra Kai instead of the Karate Kid or something, or the new Karate Kid or whatever? Why is it titled Cobra Kai? And it's titled Cobra Kai, I think, because it does center mostly on Johnny, and it's the restarting of the Cobra Kai dojo that is the impetus that kicks the story off. But also, ultimately, thematically, the show is about how that Cobra Kai philosophy, strike first, strike hard, no mercy, it shows why that's attractive, especially to people who have been alienated or have been bullied. And it also shows why it's so corrosive and hollow and ultimately self-defeating and unfulfilling. It's an incredibly deep, thoughtful take on that I did not expect from this show. So Cobra Kai is not only a lot funnier and a lot more self-aware than I thought it would be, it's also a lot deeper and a lot more thoughtful and a lot more moving than I thought it would be. And again, if you're not a big Karate Kid fan, if you didn't grow up on it like I did, if you're not attached to these characters going in, if you're not innately invested in seeing, gee, I wonder what happened to Johnny 30 years later. I wonder what did happen to Daniel 30 years later. You might not be as grabbed by it initially as I was, but man, it's a good show. It's so much better than I expected it to be. I think William Zabka deserves an Emmy for his portrayal of Johnny in this show. He's that good. He is a revelation. He is so good, and he's good in ways that I haven't seen characters be recently, where, again, he's so funny. He plays Johnny in a way that is comic and that is tragic. And it's unlike anything I've seen in a long time. He's so good. And shout out as well to Ralph Macchio as Daniel, because he takes Daniel and he makes Daniel, at this point in his life, as a husband and a father and a very successful person, but also someone who's sort of rediscovering karate and living in the shadow of Mr. Miyagi and living without Mr. Miyagi, because Pat Morita, of course, unfortunately died some years ago, and Mr. Miyagi is also dead in the show, but his shadow looms over it, and the show finds really effective ways of kind of reincorporating Miyagi and sort of his spirit into the show. But Macchio and the directors and the writers of the show have found a way to make Daniel simultaneously more likable than he was in the original movies, and even less likable. He's not the bad guy. It's not like a complete reversal. It's not like in this show Johnny is the good guy and Daniel is the bad guy. It's so much more complex than that. Daniel is, he comes across as very likable and very sympathetic, but also as, like, you can totally see why Johnny hates his guts. You know, and for Johnny, like, you see Johnny trying to get things together and be better, and you see Johnny's dawning sort of awareness in the hollowness of everything he's been taught. But you can also see why Daniel hates him, why Daniel thinks he's an ass, you know. And of course, there's another karate tournament, and the karate tournament builds to a final where there's a student from one side and a student from another side, and they're meeting in the final, but it's so much more nuanced than it was in the original film. It's not like in the original Karate Kid where it's, oh, there's Daniel, he's the good guy, there's Johnny, he's the bad guy, and you want the bullied kid to beat the bully. That's the way it is. It's so much more complex when you get to the final of the karate tournament in the last episode of Cobra Kai, where yes, there's a Cobra Kai student, yes, there's a student from somewhere other than Cobra Kai, let's say, and yes, they're meeting, but you're not necessarily having a rooting interest in either side, and there are connections to both sides and cross connections through the characters that make it so fraught and so complicated and so just riveting and dramatic. It's just so much better than I thought it would be. It's so damn good. It's 10 episodes. The episodes are about 30 minutes each, which is a perfect length. I wish there were more dramatic presentations that were 30 rather than 60 minutes, because I think 30 minutes is a terrific running time for a series. And yes, it's dramatic, but it's also super funny. And it has a lot of nostalgic stuff. It has a lot of callbacks to the previous films. But it also works so well on its own. It introduces a lot of new characters, a few of which are really, really fantastic. There's a young cast in this that does a terrific job of creating really, really compelling characters. So bringing in a new generation. So it's not just the Johnny and Daniel show. It's also this new generation of characters that have their own things to bring and their own stories to tell. And it's just so well done. And such a surprise, such a wonderful surprise. So I would highly recommend checking out Cobra Kai as well. Like Infinity War, so much better than I thought it would be, and such a wonderful, wonderful surprise. So, okay, I guess that's it. That's all I wanted to talk about over there. So, hi, back over here now. Oh, almost forgot. There we go. Actually, I'm not even sure why I cut back to this shot, because I don't have an ending.